Hello, Dr. G. The title of my dissertation is Navigating COVID-19 and Civil Unrest, Virginia Police Recruitment and Retention Crisis. The purpose of this quantitative predictive correlational study is to examine the relationships between perceived organizational support, job-related stress, perceived public support, and officers' perceptions of policing as a profession, and how these factors predict sworn law enforcement officers' intent to remain in the policing profession during the crisis of COVID-19 and civil unrest in Virginia. Recruitment and retention have been identified as a significant issue facing state and local police agencies nationwide. The specific issue of recruiting and retaining quality police officer candidates has been at the forefront for many police executives. The COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 changed the way in which many police agencies address calls for service and criminal activity as a whole. The requirement of sworn police officers to face the unknown danger of COVID-19 pandemic placed a level of occupational stress on police officers that was not seen since the AIDS pandemic of the 1980s. In many instances, the risk of contracting an unknown disease and possibly spreading that disease to their loved ones did not outweigh the reward of remaining in the law enforcement profession. According to Perry et al., 2022, since the declaration of COVID-19 as a global pandemic, many police agencies have been required to enforce an ever-changing list of emergency regulations, mask mandates, lockdown, and business closures. This study explores how perceived organizational support, job-related stress, and public sentiment affect police retention in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Perceived organizational support, or POS, refers to an officer's belief that their department values their contribution and cares for their well-being. Prior research links POS to higher morale, increased engagement, and reduced turnover, particularly during periods of crisis. Zhang et al. 2020 and Piotrowski et al. 2021. Law enforcement officers also face constant psychological pressure due to long hours, administrative burden, and exposure to trauma. These stressors often lead to burnout, absenteeism, and turnover. According to the Jobs Demand Resource Model, factors such as strong leadership and POS can help mitigate the effects of occupational stress and promote resilience. Gomes et al. 2022, Lay et al. 2022. Although existing literature has examined these variables independently, few studies have explored their combined influence on officers' decisions to remain in policing. This research addresses the gap by focusing on sworn officers in Virginia during the dual crisis of COVID-19 and civil unrest. The following research questions guide this study. What relationship exists between perceived organizational support and officers' intention to remain in the policing profession? What relationships between job-related stress and officers' intent to leave the profession? What is the relationship between perceived public support and officers' perception of policing as a profession? This study will use social exchange theory, SET, which is defined by Blau 2017, as the quality of reciprocal relationships between individuals and institutions. These relationships influence commitment, satisfaction, and behavior. Within policing, SET suggests when officers perceive fairness, recognition, and support from their organization and community, they're more likely to remain committed to the profession. Building on the social exchange theory and organizational support theory, OST, Eisenberger et al. 1986 further articulate how employees develop beliefs about the extent to which an organization values their well-being and contributions. These developed beliefs are referred to as perceived organizational support, or POS, and are important in high-stress environments such as law enforcement. The social exchange theory and organizational support theory provide a framework for how the variables of organizational support, stress, professional identity, public support shape officers' intentions to remain in the policing profession during the dual crisis. The broader theoretical foundation is provided by social exchange theory, or SET, which is closely aligned with organizational support theory, OST. According to Blau 2017, SET posits individuals engage in social relationships individually or in the workplace based on reciprocal exchanges that are expected to result in mutual benefits. The integration of SET and OST is useful in explaining the complexities of motivational shifts related to police recruitment and retention. Social exchange theory articulates why reciprocity is important, and organizational support theory explains how perceptions of support are developed and acted upon in the officer's perceived organization. The researcher has developed the following hypotheses for this study. There is no statistically significant relationship between perceived organizational support, job-related stress, perceived public support, and sworn officers' intention to remain in the policing profession. There is a statistically significant positive relationship between perceived organizational support, job-related stress, perceived public support, and sworn officers' intention to remain in the policing profession. The researcher has identified 5 variables: perceived organizational support, job-related stress, perceived public support, intention to remain in the law enforcement profession, and perception of the policing profession. These variables represent the occupational and socio-cultural environment in which Virginia law enforcement officers operated during the dual pandemic. The variables collectively offer a comprehensive framework to examine how internal organizational factors and external influences intersect when shaping police officers' outlooks, career intentions, and coping mechanisms. The 5 identified variables are perceived organizational support, job-related stress, perceived public support, intention to remain, and perception of policing as a profession were selectively to collectively represent a holistic model of the occupational ecosystem of the policing profession. These variables collectively possess empirical significance and theoretical relevance to organizational support theory. Each variable is operationalized through Likert scale instruments that allow for analysis using multiple regression techniques. The researcher will focus on internal and external influences on police officer attitudes and intentions to provide a data-driven perspective on recruitment and retention. This study utilizes a quantitative research methodology where numerical data is collected and used to examine relationships among variables. Quantitative research is appropriate for this study, as the goal is to measure the direction, magnitude, and statistical significance of relationships in such a way to allow the researcher to test hypotheses using objective, replicable procedures, Cresswell and Cresswell 2018. The researcher will use validated survey instruments and statistical models to assess how the organizational and occupational variables of stress, support, and commitment relate to police officers' intention to remain in the policing profession. The quantitative approach is appropriate for this study as it allows for standardized data collection, statistical comparison among participants, and objective measurement. The quantitative method also allows for the appropriate level of precision and generalizability to predict the outcome of professional commitment and/or turnover intention. Additionally, this approach aligns with prior research in the policing profession and occupational psychology. The factors influencing workforce stability, stress outcomes, and organizational support are frequently examined using quantitative research, according to Eisenberger et al., 1986, Tettenmeyer, 1993, and McCrae and Thompson, 2006. This study uses purposive sampling, which means the researcher will select participants intentionally based on their direct experience with the dual crisis of COVID-19 and civil unrest. As noted by Palinkas and colleagues, this method is effective when you want meaningful insights from people with firsthand knowledge. Eligible participants must be sworn officers who worked in Virginia law enforcement between March 2020 and December 2022. They need to have at least 6 consecutive months of service during that time, be at least 21 years old, and give informed consent to participate. To determine how many participants are needed, the researchers used Cohen 2013 guidelines for power analysis. With a significance level of 0.05, statistical power of 0.80, and medium effect size of 0.15, and 5 predictive variables, the minimum sample size is 92. To ensure adequate responses, the researcher is targeting 102 participants to account for about 10% attrition. Survey data will be exported in CSV format and imported to IBM SSS statistics for analysis. The data will be first examined for completeness, with any duplicate or incomplete entries removed. Likert scale variables 1 equals strong disagree to 5 equals strongly agree will be coded numerically and set to scale in SPSS variable view. This coded data will be treated as approximate interval level variables for the purpose of parametric analysis. According to Serafo and Perla, 2008, this is a commonly accepted approach in behavioral science when working with Likert data. The researcher will use descriptive statistics to summarize both participant demographics and study variables. Frequencies and percentages will be used for categorical data such as agency, type, rank, and years of service. Means, standard deviations, and ranges will be used for continuous variables such as perceived organizational support, job-related stress scores, and commitment scores. The researcher will address the research questions by using multiple linear regression analysis. Multiple linear regression is appropriate for evaluating if multiple independent variables significantly predict a single continuous dependent variable. Correlation analysis will be used to examine bivariate relationships and to check for multicollinearity before model entry. The researcher will test the following assumptions to assure validity on the multiple linear regression analysis. Assumption 1, level of measurement. The study primarily uses Likert type scales as survey instruments, but the ordinal responses will be approximated to the interval level in order to meet the assumptions of parametric testing. According to Serafo and Perla 2008, treating Likert scale data as an interval is a standard practice when researching social sciences as long as equal spacing between responses categories is theoretically justified. This will be done within SPSS by assessing numeric values to response categories and setting variable measure types to scales in variable view. Assumption 2, linearity. The relationship between independent variables of perceived organizational support and job-related stress and dependent variables of professional commitment to the policing profession will be tested using scatter plots and partial regression plots. The plots will be visually examined for a consistent straight line relationship. Assumption 3, no significant outliers. Outliers will be detected by standardized residual plots and box plots. Observations with standardized residuals greater than 3.0 will be flagged and assessed for their influence by Cook's distance and leverage values. Assumption 4, normality of residuals. A QQ plot test and Shapiro-Wilk test will evaluate whether the residuals of the regression model are approximately normally distributed. The researcher will conduct visual inspection of histograms, and skewness kurtosis values will supplement the research. Homodiscosity will be checked by plotting standardized residuals against predicted values. No funneling will be indicated. This assumption is met. Independence of errors will be tested using the Dublin-Watson statistics, with values near 2.0 indicating acceptable independence. Lastly, multicollinearity will be assessed by variance inflation factor, VIF, and tolerance value. A VIF of 1 or less than 5.0 will be the cutoff for concern. If the study confirms that perceived organizational support is positively correlated with officers' intent to remain in the profession, this would have significant policy implications. Agencies could strengthen retention by enhancing internal support systems such as transparent leadership, communication, peer recognition programs, and employee wellness initiatives. The findings would also justify expansion of wellness services, mental health resources, and peer support programs as evidence-based strategies for improving officer morale and professional commitment. These data-driven insights could guide budget allocations, leadership training, and the design of retention-focused initiatives across law enforcement agencies, particularly in high-stress environments. This study's strengths included theory-driven design, grounded in organizational support theory, use of validated instruments like SPOS and PSQ, and its timely focus on COVID-19 and civil unrest, issues with direct policy relevance. However, limitations include its cross-sectional nature, which restricts causal inference, potential self-report bias from anonymous surveys, and non-random purposeful sampling that may limit generalizability. To address these, future research should incorporate longitudinal or mixed method designs to capture changes over time and enhance depth. Additionally, triangulating survey responses with administrative retention data would improve validity and provide a more comprehensive understanding of law enforcement attrition. The findings of this study will hold substantial policy relevance for law enforcement agencies, particularly those navigating recruitment and retention challenges during and after crisis periods. By identifying perceived organizational support, job-related stress, and public sentiment as significant predictors of officers' intent to remain in the profession, This research provides evidence-based recommendations that can guide the development of strategic internal wellness programs. Agencies are encouraged to invest in mental health resources, supervisor training, and transport communication efforts to bolster institutional support. These findings justify policy decisions that allocate funding toward organizational development and public relation efforts, particularly those designed to rebuild community trust and enhance officer morale. Furthermore, the data may be used to advocate for dedicated state and federal training and retention grant funding, which can support the implementation of resilience building initiatives and evidence informed retention strategies. Law enforcement executives and policymakers can leverage these results to promote sustainable workforce planning, ultimately strengthening public safety agencies during periods of heightened stress and scrutiny. This proposed study will examine the relationship between perceived organizational support, job-related stress, and officers' intent to remain in the policing profession during the dual crisis of COVID-19 and civil unrest in Virginia. It aims to explore whether officers who perceive greater organizational support and experience lower stress are more likely to express a commitment to stay in the profession. This research is expected to make a significant contribution to policing scholarship, recruitment policy, and organizational theory by addressing the timely and unexplored intersection of crises and occupational outcome. By capturing the organizational and psychological strain faced by law enforcement during the dual crisis, this study seeks to offer data-informed insight that can strengthen institutional resilience. The findings are intended to guide the development of wellness initiatives, support structures, and policy reforms that improve retention and organizational stability in high-stress public safety environments. That concludes the presentation. Thank you for your time.